Please do not let us be parted. A dramatic narrative narrated in the first person by Isabeau Renard. Part 1. The Ghost in the Hallway. I have been dead for 3 years and my husband is planning a wedding. Not our wedding, the other one. The one he is organizing for a woman who wears my name and does not deserve it, who came into this house 6 months after I died and arranged herself in the spaces I had occupied with the specific efficiency of someone who has been planning this for a long time. The flowers she chose for the centerpieces are not the flowers I would have chosen. The typography on the invitations is too elaborate, and the menu, which I have watched them select across 3 evenings of tasting sessions in our dining room, is arranged to impress rather than to please, which is the difference between someone who understands what a celebration is for and someone who understands only its performance. I am standing in the hallway of the house I lived in for 7 years watching my husband go over the guest list for the 4th time, and I am aware of the specific irony that the wedding we never had, the one I waited for through years of business crises and expansions and strategic acquisitions, is finally being organized. Just not for me. My name is Isabeau Renard. I was born 31 years ago in Lyon, in the 16th arrondissement, to parents who ran a small stationery shop near the Opera House. I died 3 years ago on the Lac du Bourget in Savoie in a boating accident. That was not an accident. I know this now in a way that I did not know it immediately, in the way that the dead come to know things, through the slow accumulation of perception that the living cannot access. What I know I will tell you in the correct order. The man I am watching from the hallway is my husband. His name is Gabriel Renard, formerly Gabriel Marchetti, before he took my family name at my parents' request because the Renard stationery shop had been in the family for 4 generations and my parents had no son to carry it forward. He is 40 years old. He is tall and has the specific quality of presence that certain people carry. The quality that makes a room feel arranged differently when they enter it. He is also 3 years after my death, a man who has been doing something that I am slowly beginning to understand. He has not, I think, been grieving. Not in the conventional sense. He has been doing something more deliberate and more patient and more dangerous. I have been watching him for 3 years without understanding what I was watching, and in the past 3 months, I have begun to understand. The woman at his side is not who she claims to be. Her name, or the name she uses, is Heloise Vernet. She arrived in Gabriel's life in the way that people arrive when they have been planning their arrival smoothly, and with apparent inevitability, as though her presence had always been the logical next step after my absence. She is beautiful in a specific and cultivated way, the way of someone who has worked at beauty as a project. She has green eyes and dark hair, and she wears her clothes with the deliberateness of someone for whom image is both armor and weapon. She is not Heloise Vernet. I know who she is. I know many things now that I did not know when I was alive, and the knowing of them from this side of the division between living and dead has a particular and specific anguish. You cannot act on what you know. You cannot speak it. You can only watch and hope that the truth has enough force to surface on its own. The truth about Heloise Vernet will surface. I am fairly certain of this. Gabriel has been too patient and too deliberate for the past 3 years for any other outcome to be likely. But in the meantime, there is my daughter. Her name is Celine. She is 5 years old. She has my hair and her father's eyes and a laugh that I recognize as belonging to neither of us specifically, but to some ancestral source that both of us draw from the laugh of someone who finds the world genuinely funny in a way that is not yet complicated by self-consciousness. She is the best thing I made. She is the reason I am still here, rather than wherever the dead are supposed to go. Let me start from the beginning. Part 2, how I died. I did not die immediately. This is the part that the living do not generally know, the specific interval between The moment when the body stops functioning, and the moment when the self understands that this is what has happened. It was a summer evening, late July. The Lac du Bourget had the specific quality it has in July, the water very blue and very still in the afternoon, and then ruffled by the evening wind that comes down from the mountains after 6 o'clock. We had gone for the weekend, Gabriel and I, to a small hotel above the lake that we visited each summer. This was our routine, and it was, in the way of routines that are genuinely good, one of the things I loved most about our life together. On the Saturday evening, Gabriel had been called back to Lyon for an emergency. He went, I stayed. The hotel arranged for me to take a boat out on the lake with a guide the following morning, which was a thing I had done before and enjoyed. The guide who appeared the following morning was not the guide I had booked with. He said there had been a substitution, that my regular guide was unavailable. I did not question this at the time, which I would question now. What happened on the lake I know now, with the completeness that death provides. The boat had been prepared in a specific way, a mechanism I would not have understood even if I had found it designed to fail at a particular point in a particular way. The guide left me alone on the boat for 10 minutes, having been given a reason to do so that I do not need to describe here. The boat failed. I went into the water. I am a reasonable swimmer. I was not able to swim in from where I was. The lake is cold, much colder than its surface temperature, suggests the cold of deep water that comes from mountain sources and that does not warm even in the warmest summers. The cold was the thing in the end. The guide reported it as an accident, an equipment failure. The investigation found no evidence of tampering, which means either that it was done very well or that the investigation was not thorough enough. I know which of these is the case, but I cannot testify to it. I floated for a while after, not the body, the self. I floated above the lake and looked at the mountains and the blue water and the specific quality of the July morning, and then the world went to something else, and then I was somewhere that I will try to describe. Part 3, the in-between. There is a place between dying and what comes after. I do not know if it has a specific theology or whether it is something specific to the particular state I am in. What I know is what it looked like, which was a corridor of sorts, with light at various distances, and a specific quality of quiet that is not silence, but the absence of urgency. An old man was there. He had the look of someone who has been sitting in this corridor for a very long time and has found it not unpleasant. He told me several things. He told me that the first thing I needed to know was that I had a choice. I could continue immediately into whatever comes after, which he described not with any specific detail, but with the quality of a person describing something they have heard is good, but have not yet experienced. Or I could go back, not to life, not exactly, to the adjacency of life, to the specific in-between of an unfinished situation. He told me that the situation would have 3 years to resolve itself. If by the end of 3 years no living person had officially acknowledged my death, I would dissolve, not into nothing or not nothing as I understood it, into a form of dissipation that was apparently irreversible. I would cease to be recognizable as Isabeau Renard. I would cease to be anything coherent at all. He told me that the reason this might happen is that a false record existed. Someone had told an official story about my absence from the world that was not the true story, until the true story was told and recorded. The official machinery that governs the relationship between the living and the dead could not process me correctly. I said, I have a daughter. He said, yes. I said, she is 2 years old. He said, yes. I said, what happens to the 3 years if I choose to go back? He said, you spend them watching. I said, that is all. He said, that is what is available. I said, I will go back. He said, I know. And then I was in the house in Lyon, in Celine's room, standing beside the crib where my daughter was sleeping, with her arms above her head, the way she always slept. The specific surrender of a small person who does not know yet that the world requires defending against. And I stood beside the crib, and I understood that I was going to watch 3 years of my daughter's life from the wrong side of everything, and I understood that this was the hardest thing available and the only thing I wanted. I stayed. Part 4. The Woman Who Came. The first 6 months after my death, the house was quiet in the specific way of a house that has recently lost someone. Gabriel managed everything with the specific, controlled efficiency that is his particular form of grief, running the household and the business, and Celine's care with a focus that was, from the outside, admirable, and from the inside, visible as the management of an enormous pain. He did not sleep well. I know this because I watched him most nights, lying in the bedroom with the specific quality of wakefulness that has given up pretending to be sleep. He did not take anything to help him sleep. He lay there with whatever was behind his eyes, and he managed it the way he managed everything, by going through it rather than around it. He was good with Celine. This was the thing that surprised me most, or that would have surprised me if I had been capable of being surprised, which the dead, apparently, are not. The knowledge arrives whole, rather than in the piecemeal way that surprises the living. He had always been present with Celine, but in the specific way of a man who is frequently preoccupied. Genuinely loving, but partially elsewhere. After my death, he was entirely there. No partial presence. The whole of his attention on the evenings he was home, on the weekends, on the ordinary Tuesday mornings, when Celine needed someone to sit with her at breakfast and talk about whatever a 2-year-old considers important. He had given her 3 years of the full version of himself. I watched this, and it was the specific, complicated thing that watching someone do what they should have done differently in better circumstances produces. He was good. He was good because he had been given no choice except to be good. And sometimes that is the thing that produces what capability cannot. Eloise Vernet appeared at the 6-month mark. I do not know how. She arrived in his professional life, first a business contact of someone connected to his firm, and then in his social life at a dinner he attended 3 months after she first appeared, at which they were seated adjacent to each other by an arrangement that I am now certain was not accidental. I watched the dinner. I was there standing at the edge of the room, in the way that the dead stand at the edges of rooms present, and invisible, watching the specific mechanics of a moment I understood to be significant. She was charming. I will not deny this. She was the specific kind of charming that is a skill rather than a quality. The charming of someone who has studied the effect and learned to produce it reliably. She listened with complete attention. She laughed at the right moments. She introduced topics that allowed Gabriel to speak about the things he was good at, and then appeared genuinely interested in what he said about them. He was, I thought, not charmed. He was attentive in a way that was not the attentiveness of someone being charmed, but something more careful, more evaluating. But I may have been wrong about this. It is very difficult to accurately read a person you love from the wrong side of the division between living and dead. She came to the house 4 months later, ostensibly to discuss a business matter involving the Reynard stationery shop, which Gabriel had been managing since my death. She came in and walked through the entrance hall and the sitting room and the kitchen, and she did it with the specific attentiveness of someone who has been in a space before, who knows its layout at a level that is below the conscious, the attentiveness of someone who remembers rather than discovers. I stood in the kitchen and watched her, and I understood with the completeness that I now bring to understanding things that she had been in this house before. Not recently, not since my death, but before. Part 5, who she was. Her name was not Heloise Vernet. I understood this gradually through the accumulation of small observations over the months of her increasing presence in Gabriel's life and in the house. The real Heloise Vernet was my cousin. We were not close, had not been close since childhood. when the Reynard family and the Vernet family had shared holidays in Brittany and Heloise, and I had been children together in the specific way of cousins who have nothing in common except blood and proximity and the obligation of family. She was 2 years older than me and had since adolescence cultivated a resentment of the Reynard side of the family that I had always understood as the resentment of someone who felt the world had not given them their appropriate share. Eloise had disappeared from our family's orbit when she was 19. The disappearance had been accompanied by some financial irregularity involving my parents' business that was never fully explained and never officially pursued. My mother being a person who preferred peace to justice. She had gone, and we had not heard from her. I had not thought of her in years before I died. The woman in my house had Heloise's eyes. Not Heloise's adult eyes, which I would not recognize, because I had not seen them in 10 years. But the specific configuration of the eye socket, the particular distance between the eyes, the way the outer corner turned down slightly. These were Heloise's eyes. The woman in my house knew the stationery shop in the way of someone who had been in it as a child. She touched certain shelves in a specific way when she walked through them. On her first official visit, the way you touch things you remember rather than things you are discovering. She knew where the light switches were before she looked for them. She was not Heloise Vernet. She was using the name. She had constructed an identity that borrowed Heloise's provenance and then continued it, inventing 20 years of a life that Heloise had not actually lived. She was good at this. The construction was thorough and convincing. The supporting documents and history of the right quality, the kind of quality that takes time and resources to produce. Why she had done this, what she wanted. I knew the answers to both of these questions, or I had pieced together enough to understand the shape of them, and the shape was the shape of a person who had never stopped wanting what the Reynard family had, who had watched from a distance for years, who had identified my death as an opportunity. The night I died on the lake was not a coincidence. She had arranged it. She had arranged the substitution of the guide and the preparation of the boat and the specific sequence of events that had put me in the cold water on that July morning. She had arranged all of this with a patience and precision that indicated years of planning, and she had then arranged herself, after an appropriate interval, to step into the space my death had created. I could not prove this. I could not speak. I could not point or write or demonstrate through any of the channels that the living use to communicate truth. I was a ghost in my own house, watching a woman who had killed me make arrangements for a wedding. But I had Celine. Part 6, my daughter. Celine could see me. I did not understand this for the first month. She was 2 years old, and the communication available to a 2-year-old is limited in the ways that are obvious, and the communication available to a ghost is limited in the ways that I was still learning. But she could see me. She looked at me with the direct, untroubled gaze of a small child encountering something that is outside the ordinary and deciding that it belongs in the ordinary anyway. She called me maman in the specific way she had always called me maman, the tone unchanged, the expectation that I would respond. And I responded the way ghosts can respond, which is not with words, but with something that the living sometimes call atmosphere, the specific quality of presence that makes a space feel different from how it feels when it is empty. She could feel this, Celine. She was too young and too unencumbered by the received wisdom of adults to doubt what she felt. She began to act as a messenger, not deliberately, not with any understanding of what she was doing, but children who can see things that adults cannot see are also children who talk about what they see, and Celine talked. She talked to her father at breakfast and at bedtime and on the walk to the nursery school she had started attending. And what she said was reported by Gabriel to his friend and business partner Arnaud, with the specific quality of a man who does not know what to do with information he cannot categorize. Celine says her mother is still here. Arnaud said over coffee in Gabriel's office, This is not unusual for children who have lost a parent. It can last months. Gabriel said, it has been 18 months. Arnaud said children sometimes take longer. Gabriel said she describes specific things she should not know. Arnaud said, like what? Gabriel said, she told me that her mother does not like the flowers Heloise chose for the dining room. She told me which specific flowers her mother preferred instead. She named them. Celine is 3 years old. Arnaud was quiet. Gabriel said I checked. She is right about the flowers. Isabeau always preferred those specific ones. I would not have been able to tell you this unprompted. But when Celine named them, I knew immediately they were correct. Arnaud said, Gabriel, what are you thinking? Gabriel said, I am thinking that my daughter can see something I cannot, and that whatever she is seeing is telling her true things. He said this in the specific tone of a man who has been thinking it for a long time and has finally said it aloud, and the saying aloud of it changes the quality of the thought, from a private suspicion to something that now exists in the shared space between people. I was in the room. I was standing near the window of his office, where I often stood because the light came through the south-facing window in the afternoons in a way that I had always found specifically beautiful. The Lyon winter light that is flat and honest, and standing in it felt like the closest thing to warmth available to me. When Gabriel said it, I turned toward him. I could not tell him I was there. But I looked at him with everything I had, and I thought, he is paying attention. He is paying the kind of attention that things need in order to surface. He is going to be all right. And beneath this thought, quieter and less manageable, he is going to find out the truth. And the truth is going to cost him more than he knows. Part 7, The Diary. On the afternoon of day 842 of my death, the woman who called herself Heloise Vernet found my diary. She found it in the room that had been mine, which Gabriel had asked to be kept, as it was which she had taken to entering on the occasional afternoon when she believed herself to be alone in the house. She had been looking for something. I understood this from the quality of her searching. The systematic quality of a person who knows what they are looking for rather than the exploratory quality of simple curiosity. What she found was not what she was looking for. What she found was my diary, which was in the drawer of the small writing desk under a false bottom that I had installed myself in the second year of our marriage, using a tutorial from a bookbinding website and a thin piece of lacquered wood. The false bottom was good. She found the diary by accident, by pressing too hard on the base of the drawer while looking for something else. She opened it. I was in the room. I am always in the room when Celine is in the house, because where Celine is where I am. And Celine had been in her bedroom when Heloise entered mine. I watched her open my diary, and I felt the specific anguish of a person watching someone read their most private thoughts, the anguish that the living feel and that the dead feel also, perhaps more sharply because of the complete inability to intervene. The diary contained years of private thought. It contained, among many other things, the specific record of a woman who had loved her husband through difficult years, who had waited for the wedding that was always being postponed, who had understood and not always accepted the postponements, who had sometimes been lonely in a house with a man who was present but preoccupied. It contained the truth of my feelings in a form that was more honest than anything I had ever said aloud. She read it with the specific attention of someone looking for material that can be used. Gabriel came home unexpectedly. I heard his key in the door, and I felt for the first time in 3 years the specific quality of something moving toward its outcome, the footsteps on the stairs, the door of my room opening. He said, "What are you doing in here?" She said I was looking for the insurance documents. I thought they might be in here somewhere. He said, "They are in the study. You know where they are." She said I must have forgotten. He said, after a pause, "What is that?" She said, "An old diary. I found it in the drawer." He said, "Put it down." She put it down. He picked it up. He looked at it for a moment. The cover of it. The specific cover I had chosen because it was the color of the lake in summer. Then he opened it. He stood in the room and read for several minutes while she watched him, with the expression of someone who is calculating rapidly. Then he closed it. He said, "Leave this room." His voice had the quality of something controlled, very tightly at the surface. She left. He stood in my room for a while with the diary in his hands. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed. I sat beside him, the way ghosts sit beside people, which is not sitting exactly but the closest available approximation. I was there beside him while he held my diary. He said into the room very quietly, "Isabeau." I could not answer, but he sat there for a long time, and the quality of his sitting had in it something that I will try to describe and cannot entirely. The quality of a person who has been keeping something enormous at bay for a very long time, and who in this moment, in this room, with this object in his hands, is allowing himself to know it. Part 8, Gabriel. I want to tell you who Gabriel was because the story of what he did over the 3 years of my death cannot be understood without the person who did it. He is a man of extraordinary patience and extraordinary capacity for planning. These are professional qualities that he was trained in from childhood. The son of a man who built a business from nothing, and who taught his son that the most important skill in any complex situation is the ability to hold a long view when everyone around you is focused on the immediate. He had applied this to business with results that were, by any objective measure, considerable. He had also, I understood gradually from watching him over 3 years, applied it to the situation of my death. He had known not immediately, but within the first weeks that my death was not what it appeared to be. He had not had proof. He had had the specific instinct of a man who understood the people and the mechanics of the situation, and who, when looking at the official account, could feel the places where the account did not fit the thing it was describing. He had sat with this instinct and had made a decision. The decision was not to act immediately. The decision was to gather what was necessary and to be patient and to allow the truth to surface in its own time and to use the time to understand as much as possible about what had actually happened before moving. The woman who called herself Heloise Vernet was part of this plan, not because he trusted her or wanted her presence, because he needed her to believe she was winning in order to understand the full dimensions of what she had done. A person who believes they are winning becomes careless. Careless people reveal things. He needed to know everything before he acted, because acting before you know everything in a situation like this produces incomplete justice. He had spent 3 years watching her, the way I had spent 3 years watching both of them, from his side of things and from mine. He had been protecting Celine in the meantime. This was the most important thing, and it was the thing he had been most careful about. The woman in his house was being carefully managed. Her access to Celine limited her influence on Celine's daily life, minimized her behavior around the child, observed with the specific attention of someone who is keeping records. He was keeping records. I did not understand all of this immediately. I understood it in pieces as the pieces became visible, and the assembling of the picture from the pieces was its own specific and anguishing form of knowledge. He had been doing this alone. 3 years of managing an enormous and dangerous situation, of caring for our daughter, of allowing a woman he despised to believe he cared for her, all without telling anyone, or almost anyone. He had told Arnaud. I understood this later. Arnaud had been his partner in understanding what had happened, the person who had helped him investigate, carefully and quietly, and without triggering whatever mechanisms the woman in his house had put in place to protect herself if the investigation became obvious. He had been doing all of this and also watching Celine watch me and choosing not to ask too many questions about what Celine was seeing, because the answers might have changed the specific quality of his patience. Part 9, the day before the 3rd year. On the day before the 3rd anniversary of my death, I understood that I was running out of time. The old man in the corridor had told me 3 years. 3 years of days that I had been counting without wanting to count them, because counting them was an acknowledgement that the time would end. the time was ending. I had one day. After one day, if no living person had officially acknowledged that I had died, I would dissolve into whatever dissolution meant. The specific terror of this, I want to be honest about, was not primarily about what would happen to me. What I was afraid of was Celine. Without me watching her, without the specific quality of presence I provided to her daily world, she would be alone with whatever came next. And whatever came next was still uncertain. Gabriel was close. I understood this from watching him. The 3 years had been building towards something, and the something was close. But close was not certain, and certain was what I needed. On that day, the day before the 3rd year, Gabriel left the house early in the morning. He did not tell the woman, who called herself Heloise Vernet, where he was going. I had not been able to follow him. Outside the house, my range was limited to the house and the immediate garden, and I watched him go from the upstairs window with the specific helplessness of a ghost who cannot do the one thing that needs to be done. Celine came to the window beside me. She looked out at the street where Gabriel's car had been. Then she looked at the space where I was, with the direct, untroubled gaze she had always brought to my presence. She said, "Where did Bar go?" I said into the air, knowing she might not hear it as words but might feel it as something. He went to find the truth. She looked at me for another moment. Then she said, "Are you scared, maman?" I said yes. She reached out her hand. Her small hand went into the space where my hand would have been if I had a hand to reach with, and she held it, or held the idea of it, or held whatever of me was available to be held. She said, "I will tell Bar you are scared." She turned from the window and went downstairs. I stood at the window and watched the empty street, and I counted the hours I had left. Part 10, the confession. Gabriel returned in the afternoon with 3 men I did not recognize, and Arnaud. They went into the study. The woman who called herself Eloise Vernet was not in the house. She had left for a lunch appointment that I now understood had been arranged to ensure her absence. I went to the study. I stood in the room while Gabriel spoke, and the 3 men listened. One of them had the appearance of a lawyer. One had the appearance of a police officer in plain clothes. The third I did not recognize. Gabriel spoke for a long time. He spoke the way he speaks when he has been preparing to speak for a very long time, precisely and completely, and without visible emotion. Because visible emotion is something he has always managed as a separate and later process. The emotion that comes after the necessary thing is done. He told them what he knew. The substituted guide, the prepared boat, the payment traceable through the specific labyrinthine, but ultimately completable process of financial investigation to an account connected to a name that was the woman in his house's real name, which I will not write here because it is still in the legal record, and I have no desire to give it more space than it requires. He told them about the 3 years of investigation, the evidence he had gathered quietly and carefully, the kind of evidence that is gathered by a person who is not in a hurry, because they understand that evidence gathered in haste is evidence challenged successfully. He had gathered it completely. He told them about the false identity, the borrowed name, the documents, the history constructed to provide access to the Renard family and its business and its house. He told them what she had wanted, which was what she had always wanted, the thing she had wanted since childhood, in a family that had been adjacent to ours and had always felt to the person she was to be less than it should have been. The stationery business, the house, the name, the specific form of established security that the Renard family represented and that she had decided she was owed. The 3 men listened. The lawyer asked questions. The police officer asked different questions. The 3rd man, whose function I still did not entirely understand, made notes. After they left, Gabriel sat alone in the study for a while. Then Celine came in. She had been with the housekeeper in the kitchen, and she came into the study with the specific, confident entry of a child who knows that every room in a house is available to her, who has never been made to feel that her presence is conditional. She climbed into the chair beside him. She said, "Ba." He said, "Yes." She said, "Maman says she is scared." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I know." Celine said, "Are you going to make it okay?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Promise." He said, "I promise." She settled against him in the chair. He put his arm around her, and they sat in the study in the late afternoon light. I stood in the doorway, and I could not touch either of them. But I was there. Part 11, the third morning. The day of the third anniversary arrived. It was a Tuesday in July, exactly 3 years after the morning on the lake. The house was very quiet. The woman who had called herself Heloise Vernet was in police custody, having been detained the previous evening in connection with the investigation that Gabriel's evidence had triggered. This had happened quickly, with the specific efficiency of systems that have been given what they need to act. The house was ours again, or the closest thing to ours that it could be with me not entirely in it. Gabriel came downstairs at 7. He made breakfast for Celine in the kitchen in the specific way he had learned over 3 years of mornings, the way of a man who has become, through necessity and practice, actually good at the ordinary domestic things he had not previously been good at. He made eggs, he made toast, he poured orange juice in the specific glass that Celine liked. The one with the small painted flowers around the rim that I had bought at a market in Provence 2 summers before I died. Celine sat at the table in her pajamas and ate her breakfast with the focused attention she brings to food. Gabriel sat across from her with his coffee. He said, "Celine." She said, "Ba." He said, "I have to do something today, something important, and I need you to help me do it." She looked at him with the serious attention she gives to important things. He said, "We need to tell some people officially that your maman died, that she is really gone, that she is not coming back in the way that people come back." Celine said, "But she is still here." He said, "Yes, she is still here in some ways, but we need to make it official, so that she can be where she is supposed to be." Celine thought about this with the thoroughness of a 5-year-old working through a complex problem. She said, "And then will she not be here anymore?" He said, "I think so. I think she will be where she needs to be." Celine said, "But we will still be able to talk to her." He said, "Yes, I believe so. In the way that people can always talk to the people they love, who are gone. That does not end." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." Gabriel drove to the municipal office that morning. He filed the papers that officially recorded the death of Isabeau Renard, born in Lyon on the 14th of April, died on the Lac de Bourget on the 19th of July, 3 years before this morning. He did it with Celine beside him, sitting in the official chair in the official room with the patience of a child who has agreed to do something important and is taking the agreement seriously. He did it with all the documentation that the 3 years of investigation had produced. The full truth of what had happened to me was in the record. The official story was now the true story. I was in the room. The old man had not specified whether I would be able to be in the room. But I was there. When Gabriel signed the final document, he looked up. He looked at the space near the window where the light came through the south-facing light, the one I had always preferred. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked back at the document. He put it in the folder. He picked up Celine and carried her out of the building. Part 12, the bridge. What I want to tell you about the place where I went afterward is not easily describable, and I will not try to describe it completely. What I will tell you is what mattered. The old man was there. He looked unchanged, which is apparently how people who have been in a particular place for a long time look. He said, "There you are." "There." I said, "Here I am." He said, 3 years. I said, "Yes." He said, "You saw your daughter grow." I said, "I saw 5 years of her. I would have liked more." He said, "Yes. That is the thing most people say who have been where you have been." I said, "She can still talk to her father. He will tell her about me." He said, "Yes, he will." We stood in the place that was not exactly a corridor and not exactly a room for a moment. Then I asked the question I had been carrying since the moment the old man told me that Gabriel had given 10 years of his life to have the ability to see me. I said, is it true? What was said? That he paid something for the ability to see me. The old man said, yes. I said, how much? He said, a significant number of years. People who do these things always say it was worth it. And I have never found a reason to argue with them. I said, when? He said, when you had been gone for 8 months. When he first understood that Celine could see you and wanted to be able to see you also. He found someone who knew how to arrange such things. I sat with this, or stood with it. The dead stand differently from the living, but the posture of receiving difficult information is the same. He had given up years of his life to be able to see me. Not because he was certain I was there, not because it was rational or provable or recommended by any sensible advisor, because Celine could see me and he wanted to share that with her. Because he could not bear the thought that his daughter was talking to someone he could not see. That is who he is. I said, how long did he give? The old man said, enough to make the difference. I said, he will not have as long. The old man said no. But he always knew that. He was told exactly what he was giving, and he chose it with the full knowledge of what it meant. I stood in the knot corridor for a long time with this. Then I said, I want to wait for him. The old man said, people often want that. I said, is it possible? He said, it depends on how you wait. There are productive ways to wait and unproductive ones. I said, tell me the productive ways. He did. And that is what I am doing. Part 13, what Gabriel did. I am going to tell you the rest of Gabriel's story because he deserves to have it told and because Celine deserves to know it when she is old enough to understand it. He raised her, alone with the help of my parents and his and Arno and the housekeeper, who had worked for us for years and who had, without being told, to continue to make sure that certain things about the house remained as they had been when I was alive. She brought flowers in the kind I had always preferred. She kept my room as it was. She made sure that Celine understood, without being told explicitly, that her mother's presence in the house was a real thing that deserved respect. Gabriel himself did not remarry. Not because he made a dramatic decision not to. Simply because the one person he had wanted to build a life with was not there to build it with, and he found that the desire to build that specific life did not transfer to a different person. He had the business, and he had Celine, and he had, in the evenings, the specific and private life of a person who is at peace with what is available. He was good at his work. He became better over the years in the way that people become better at things when the thing they are doing has become their primary commitment, rather than one of several. The business grew. He was known for a particular quality of reliability and long-term thinking that his clients found unusual and that he had developed, he sometimes said, through the specific experience of having to think very long-term about very difficult things. He talked to Celine about me. Every year on my birthday, and on the anniversary of my death, and on the days when she asked, which were sometimes other days, random Tuesdays, when something reminded her. He told her who I had been, the person before the ghost, the person who had loved her in the first 2 years of her life, and who had left her more than she knew. He told her the true story, the full story in the age-appropriate installments that such a story requires. And when she was old enough to receive the complete version, he gave it to her without softening it. She became Celine, the woman I would have wanted her to become, not because of me, or not only because of me, because of Gabriel, who gave her everything, and because of herself, which is where it ultimately comes from. When she was 20, she found the diary, the real one, the one I had kept the record of my private life, in the one she found in the trunk in my room that had been undisturbed for 18 years. She brought it to Gabriel, and he read it for the first time, without the presence of the woman who had tried to use it against him. He read it, and he held it after. The way you hold something that is irreplaceable. He grew old slowly. He was by all accounts a man who aged well, not because he was particularly healthy or particularly lucky, but because he had organized his life around things that mattered, and people who do this tend to carry the years differently from people who have not. He died on a Tuesday in November when Celine was 35, He died the way people die when they have been ready for a long time, without being in a hurry, in a room that was quiet and lit and contained the people he loved. Celine held his hand. He said, because he had always been a direct man, I am going to find her. She said, tell her I said hello. He said, she knows. Then he was quiet for a while. Then he was gone. Epilogue. The bridge. I am waiting at the bridge. Not a literal bridge, not the kind that spans water, but the specific point of arrival, the place where the in-between opens into whatever comes after it. I have been here since the official recording of my death, which freed me from the 3-year limit. And I have been here in the way that the old man said was productive, the way of someone who is genuinely present in the waiting, rather than diminished by it. I have been watching. The knot corridor has its own quality of time, which is different from the time the living experience, and the watching I have been able to do from here has been its own form of continuation. I watched Gabriel grow old. I watched Celine become herself. I watched the business of life, the ordinary days and the extraordinary ones, the birthdays and the losses and the small, unannounced moments of joy that are the substance of a human life, when you look at it honestly. I watched Gabriel one last time on the Tuesday in November, in the room with Celine, holding his hand. I watched him come. He arrived the way people arrive at this place, which is the way you arrive anywhere that you have been traveling toward for a long time, with the specific quality of completion that belongs to the arrival at the thing that was always the destination. He was 40 again, the age he was when he first started seeing me, when the old man says he made the exchange. He had that face and that presence and the specific quality of his attention, which has always been from the first moment I was in a room with him, one of the things I found most remarkable about him. He looked around. He found me. He said, you waited. I said I would. He said I thought it might be a long time. I said it was worth it. He reached for my hand, and here in this place there was no passing through. There was only the hand and the taking of it, and the specific quality of being held by someone who has always held you in the complete way, even when the holding was invisible to them. I said, Celine says hello. He said, she always was the practical one. I said, she gets it from you. He said, she gets it from both of us. We stood at the bridge together. The water below, if it was water, caught whatever light there was in this place, and did what water does, which is to continue unhurried in the direction it has always been going. He said, what happens now? I said, I do not entirely know. Something good, I think. He said, you think? I said, I am fairly certain. He looked at the water. He said in the specific tone of someone who has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally arrived at the place where he can say it. I am sorry I did not find out sooner. What happened to you? I am sorry it took 3 years. I said, you found it exactly when it needed to be found. He said, you are too generous. I said, I have had a long time to think about it. I am not being generous. I am being accurate. The 3 years were what they were, and they gave me what they gave me, and they gave Celine what she needed, and they gave you the truth in the most complete form available. I would not change them. He looked at me for a long time with the specific quality of his attention that has always made me feel, whatever the circumstances, that I am the most important thing in the room. He said, Isabeau. I said, yes. He said, I have been wanting to tell you something for 35 years. I said, tell me. He said, that night on the lake, before it happened in the afternoon. You were reading on the deck, and the light was the specific quality of the lake light in July, and you looked up because a bird went over and the bird startled you, and you laughed. And I thought, watching you, that there is not a thing in the world I have seen that is as good as this. I stood at the bridge in the knot corridor and held his hand and heard this. I said, why did you not tell me then? He said, I was going to tell you that evening. I said, oh. He said, yes. We stood at the bridge, and the water continued below us, and the light in this place was the light that belongs to things that have been waiting long enough. I said, you can tell me now. He said, I just did. I said, tell me again. He told me again, and then we went wherever it is that people go, who have finished the necessary things, which is the only place left to go, which I cannot describe because I have not been there yet, but which I am fairly certain is a place with good light. And Please Do Not Let Us Be Parted is an original dramatic narrative set in Lyon, France and the surrounding region. All characters, events, and institutions depicted herein are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead, or to actual organizations or events, is entirely coincidental. Additional chapter, The Things Heloise Did. I want to tell you about the woman who was not Heloise Vernet, because leaving her as a figure without interior makes the story incomplete. Her real name was Margot Bastien. She was 37 when she came to our house, which means she was 29 when she began planning what she planned, which tells you something about the specific kind of patience required to do what she did. Not impulsive, not opportunistic in the ordinary sense, something colder and more organized. The patience of someone who has decided that the world owes them something and who has structured their life around the project of collecting. She grew up knowing about the Renard family through her mother, who had been a childhood friend of my aunt, the Vernet branch of the family. She had heard about the stationery shop and the house and the established life of the Renard family from childhood, and she had understood it from the beginning as the life she should have had. This is the specific psychology of a person who grows up adjacent to something comfortable and concludes that the adjacency is an injustice rather than simply an accident of birth. When Heloise, the real Heloise, my actual cousin, died in a hiking accident in the Pyrenees at the age of 26, Margot saw an opportunity. Heloise had been estranged from the family. There was no one who would closely examine someone claiming to be her. The timing was right, and the circumstances were available, and Margot was the kind of person who acts on available circumstances. She spent 2 years building the false identity. Then she spent 3 more years monitoring the Renard family from a distance, identifying weaknesses, understanding the landscape of the people, and the business she intended to enter. She identified me as the obstacle. This is the part that I find most difficult to hold. Not because it surprises me that someone would identify me as an obstacle, but because of what it says about the specific quality of her perception. She looked at me and saw not a person, but a function, a position to be vacated. The obstacle between herself and what she wanted was not a life she needed to consider. It was simply a logistical problem to be solved. The boat, the guide, the preparation, these were the solution. She was careful. She was patient. She understood that the aftermath would be examined, and she managed the aftermath with the same precision she managed everything. What she had not managed was Gabriel. She had not correctly predicted that Gabriel would spend 3 years preparing a case against her, because she had underestimated the specific quality of his love, which is not dramatic or announced, but is very deep and very long and very capable of organizing itself around a patient purpose. She had assessed him as someone who would grieve and then move on, as men in his position sometimes do, into the arms of whatever was available. She had positioned herself to be what was available. He had allowed her to believe this. For 3 years, he had allowed her to believe that she was succeeding, and she had believed it, because the belief suited her, and because she was not ultimately a person of great imagination when it came to the people around her. She understood them as functions, not as interiors, and interiors are where the most important things happen. The day the police came for her, she looked at Gabriel with an expression that I watched from the doorway of the study, and the expression was not entirely what I expected. It contained what I expected, the specific fury of someone who has been outplayed and cannot accept it. But beneath the fury was something else, a specific and genuine bewilderment. She had genuinely not understood, not even at the end, that what she was doing had a cost to the people it was done to. She had not been able to imagine the interior of Isabeau Renard with enough completeness to understand it as a loss. This is the saddest thing about Margot Bastien, and it is the thing I find myself from this distance thinking about most. Not her cruelty, which was real and has had real consequences, but her imagination. The specific and terrible limitation of never being able to fully enter another person's experience. It had made her capable of the worst thing. It had also made her incapable of the best things. She had never loved anyone the way Gabriel loved me. She had never been loved the way I was loved. She had spent her life pursuing the external form of what she saw in the Reynard family, without understanding that the external form was the consequence of something interior, something she could not have purchased or stolen or inhabited under a false name. Justice found her. That is all I want to say about the legal outcome. Justice found her, and she is somewhere now answering for the specific cost of what she chose, and that process belongs to her and the institutions that manage it, and not to me. What belongs to me is the rest. Additional chapter Celine at 20. This is what I watched from the bridge. Celine at 20 was a specific and recognizable person. Not me and not Gabriel and not the combination of us in the obvious way, but the thing that comes out when two people love each other genuinely and produce a child in that love, the thing that belongs to neither of them specifically, and to both. She was studying architecture at the École Nationale Supérieure d'Architecture in Lyon. She had wanted this since she was 14, and she had pursued it with the specific, focused patience that I recognized as coming from Gabriel, and the specific creative attention that he told me was mine. The quality of someone who sees space and light and arrangement as a language and who wants to speak it. She was excellent at it. Her professors said things about her work that made Gabriel's face do the thing it did when something exceeded his expectations, the specific opening of expression of a person who is proud, in a way that goes past the ordinary. She found the diary when she was clearing my room. She had waited until she was 20 to clear it, which is a decision she had made herself without anyone telling her to, the sense that 20 was old enough to receive whatever was in there. She found the false bottom the same way the false Heloise had found it, by pressing too hard on the base of the drawer. And unlike the false Heloise, she understood immediately what it was and handled it with the specific care of someone encountering something irreplaceable. She read it. She read it over several evenings, sitting in the chair in my room, with the Lyon winter light doing its flat and honest work through the south-facing window. I watched her read it from the bridge, which is the quality of watching available from where I am not perfect, not complete, but enough. She cried once. The entry from before she was born, the entry where I wrote about being frightened that I was not capable of being the kind of mother I wanted to be, that my own nature was too private and too contained to give a child what a child needed. She read this and she cried in the specific way of someone who has just been shown something they recognize, and then she laughed. Which is also the specific way of someone who has just been shown something they recognize. She said to the room to me, "You are capable of it, maman." She closed the diary. She held it for a while. Then she brought it to Gabriel, and he read it and held it. And I watched both of them from the bridge, and the watching was its own form of being with them. Additional chapter The Exchange. I have been thinking about what Gabriel gave in order to be able to see me. And I want to write about it honestly because it deserves honest treatment. He gave years of his life. Specifically, he gave 10 years, which means he knew when he died at 68 that without the exchange he would have lived to 78. He had understood this when he made the exchange. The old man here has told me that Gabriel was told exactly what he was giving and chose it in the specific way of a person who has run the calculation and found it straightforwardly worth it. He gave 10 years to be able to see me and talk to me through Celine for the time I was in the house. 10 years so that my daughter did not have to be the only one who could see her mother. 10 years so that when Celine came to him and said, "Maman says she is scared," he could look in the direction of where I was and know that I was there. He did not tell me this when he was alive. He could not, because to tell me would have been to tell me that the ability to see me came at a cost, and he understood that I would have been unable to receive this without distress, and he decided that I did not need to carry it alongside everything else I was carrying. This is characteristic of him. The specific quality of his love has always been the management of the distribution of weight. He takes on more so that I carry less without announcing the taking on. He is not a dramatic person. He does not make gestures. He makes decisions quietly and completely, and then he lives with the consequences of them without complaint. He gave 10 years of his life to share 3 years of my death with me. I think about this often standing at the bridge. I think about it the way you think about things that are too large to fully receive, that you can only approach from different angles and understand in pieces. The gift of it is too complete to hold all at once, so I hold it in pieces. The specific piece of Tuesday mornings when Celine would tell him what I was trying to communicate, and he would look at the space where I was and nod. The piece of the evenings in the study when he sat with the diary and I sat beside him on the bed, and we were in the same room without being able to touch. The piece of the day at the Civil Affairs office when he looked at the south-facing light, and I was there in it. He gave 10 years. He is here now, and we have whatever comes after to spend together, which the old man says is not measured in years in the same way, which means the exchange has already been returned with interest. I told him this when he arrived. He said, I know. I said, you always know things. He said, not always, not for a long time. I said, what changed? He said, you died. And everything became very clear very quickly. We stood at the bridge with the water below us. I said, that is the saddest version of clarity I have ever heard. He said, yes, but it was clarity. He held my hand. The bridge, the water, the light of a place I cannot describe, but that is good. This is where we are. We are here. Additional chapter, the stationery shop. One more thing. The Reynard stationery shop on the street near the Opera House in Lyon is still there. It has been there for 4 generations, and it will be there for more. Celine decided in the way that she decides things, which is with the specific focused certainty of someone who has thought about it completely before announcing it, that she was going to run it alongside her architecture practice. Not to manage it exclusively, not to give up the architecture, but to be in it, in the way that you are, in a place that belongs to you by a form of inheritance that is more than property. She is in it on Saturday mornings and on the occasional afternoon when the architecture studio does not need her. And she has the specific quality in that space that I am told I had in it. The quality of someone who belongs there, whose presence in the space is not effort, but simply the right thing. The handmade papers are still there, the inks in their specific colours, the notebooks with the covers that my grandmother designed 60 years ago and that have remained unchanged because they are exactly right. The smell of the place, which is paper and a particular wood polish, and something older than both, the specific accumulation of decades of a particular kind of work, Gabriel used to bring me there on Saturday mornings when we were first together. Before we were married, before everything. We would look at the papers and he would let me show him the things I found beautiful, the specific watercolors and the handmade pressing and the notebooks with their particular weight. And he would watch me show them to him with the quality of attention I did not yet know he was practicing. He always knew which things I loved, not because I told him all of them I did not, because he had been paying attention from the beginning. Celine has this quality also. The people who come into the shop on Saturday mornings leave, having been seen in the specific way of someone who was truly attended to. She is not performing service. She is interested. She is her father's daughter in this, and I like to think some of it is also mine. The shop continues. The name on the door says Reynard. That is enough. Additional chapter, what I know now. There are things the dead know that the living cannot, and I want to put some of them on record before this account is finished. The first thing is about love, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that announces itself and requires witnesses, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up in the specific choice of a glass with painted flowers, in the reading of a diary by a winter window, in the giving of 10 years without mentioning it. The quiet kind is the durable kind. It does not need to be performed in order to be real. It is simply there, doing what it does, which is to make the person who is the object of it feel in the specific way that love makes people feel that the world contains them. I was contained, not in the first years of my marriage, not entirely, but at the end of it, in the understanding that arrived too late for the living version and exactly on time for the version of me that is here now. I understand that I was always the person Gabriel was actually looking at. Even when he appeared to be looking at other things, the looking was the whole of it, and the looking never stopped. The second thing is about children. Celine knew things I did not tell her. She knew them in the body, which is where children keep the truest knowledge. The knowledge that has not yet been translated into the language the mind uses and has therefore not been filtered through the mind's preference for what is manageable. She knew I was there. She knew my preferences and my qualities and the specific texture of my love for her in a way that she could not have been taught, and that came from somewhere more fundamental than teaching. Children who are loved carry the love in them even when the source of the love is gone. This is not a metaphor, it is a mechanism. The love becomes part of them, part of the way they see and the way they receive what the world offers, and it continues operating in them long after the person who generated it has left. Celine carries me the way that the stationery shop carries my grandmother's design on the cover of the notebooks. Not displayed, not announced, built in, part of the structure. The third thing is about regret. I had some. I want to be honest about this. The specific regret of a person who loved someone for 7 years and died before they understood. The full form of that love is a real kind of regret, and I carried it. What I understand now from this side is that the regret was never necessary. Not because the love was not real or not worth more than it received, but because love given completely and genuinely has its own life regardless of what it receives in return. The love I gave Gabriel in those 7 years was mine. It existed fully in me. It changed me and formed me, and was one of the primary facts of my life. Whether it was returned in equal measure while I was alive is a secondary matter. Not because the returning does not matter, but because the primary thing is always the giving, and the giving was complete. He came for me. He gave what he gave, and he waited, and he came. That is the rest of the accounting. I do not have regrets anymore. I have gratitude, which is what happens when you have processed the regrets completely and found at the bottom of them the thing that was true all along. The things that were true all along lie on in winter. A daughter who laughs with the laugh of something older than either of us. A shop on a street near an opera house with a name on the door. A man who looked at me in the July light on a lake and knew and did not say it, and has been saying it ever since in the specific language of everything he has done. These things are mine. They are enough. They are, I find, everything.